The architectural history of Brno. A city where stone remembers time. When you first arrive in Brno, the second largest city of the Czech Republic, you may feel something unusual. It does not shout its beauty like Prague. It does not overwhelm you with grand palaces at every corner. Instead, Brno whispers its history. You feel it slowly, in narrow medieval streets, in unexpected modern buildings, and in the quiet harmony between old stone and new ideas. Brno is a city shaped by layers of time. Romans passed nearby. Medieval kings fortified it. Baroque architects decorated it. Industrialists transformed it. And modern architects turned it into a global icon. Every era left something behind, and together, they created a city that feels deeply authentic. This is the architectural story of Brno, a story of defense, faith, innovation, struggle, and bold imagination. 1. Early beginnings, from settlements to stone. The architectural story of Brno begins long before the city had walls, towers, or churches. Archaeological evidence shows that people lived in this region thousands of years ago. The fertile land of South Moravia attracted early farmers and traders. Simple wooden houses, clay structures, and small fortified settlements once stood where the city now rises. During Roman times, the area near Brno was part of important trade routes connecting Central Europe. While Brno was not a major Roman city, Roman influence can still be felt in planning logic, road systems, and settlement patterns. But real urban architecture began to take shape during the early Middle Ages, when Slavic tribes established permanent settlements. Wooden houses clustered around marketplaces, and simple churches became spiritual centers. These early structures were fragile and temporary. Almost none survived, but they laid the foundation for the city's future. 2. Medieval Brno, walls, castles, and faith. The true architectural identity of Brno was born in the 11th and 12th centuries, when it officially became a town. Spilberk Castle, the guardian of Brno. High above the city stands Spilberk Castle, Brno's most powerful architectural symbol. Originally built in the 13th century as a royal castle, Spilberk was designed in Romanesque and early Gothic styles. Thick stone walls, defensive towers, and strategic positioning made it almost impossible to conquer. Over time, the castle transformed, from royal residence to military fortress, to one of Europe's most feared prisons. Its architecture reflects this transformation. Defensive walls became thicker. Bastions were added. Windows became narrow and intimidating. The castle stopped being elegant. It became brutal and functional. Even today, Spilberk dominates Brno's skyline, reminding us that architecture can represent power, fear, and control. Gothic churches and medieval streets. As Brno grew, faith shaped its architecture. The Cathedral of Saints Peter and Paul, perched on Petrov Hill, is a masterpiece of Gothic architecture. Tall spires reach toward the sky, pointed arches draw the eyes upward, and stained glass fills the interior with colored light. It was designed not just to house worshippers, but to inspire awe. Elsewhere, Gothic churches, monasteries, and townhouses appeared. Narrow streets followed organic medieval patterns rather than modern grids. Buildings leaned slightly toward each other, creating intimate urban spaces. This medieval Brno was dense, defensive, and deeply spiritual. 3. Renaissance Brno. Beauty meets order. By the 16th century, Brno entered the Renaissance era, and architecture began to change its language. Defense was still important, but beauty, symmetry, and proportion became equally valued. Townhouses and palaces. Wealthy merchants and nobles rebuilt their homes with Renaissance elegance. Gothic facades were replaced with decorative stone portals, symmetrical windows, elegant courtyards. Italian influence became visible as architects brought new ideas from the south. Architecture became human-centered, designed for comfort as well as prestige. Urban planning and fortifications. At the same time, Brno strengthened its defenses. Renaissance military architecture modernized city walls, adding angular bastions to resist cannons. This period shows how Brno balanced art and survival, blending refinement with realism. 4. Baroque Brno, drama in stone. The 17th and 18th centuries transformed Brno dramatically. The Baroque period brought emotional, theatrical architecture designed to impress, inspire, and overwhelm. Churches and monasteries. Baroque churches filled the city with movement and energy. Curved facades, rich ornamentation, fresco-covered ceilings, and dramatic lighting created spaces that felt alive. Architecture was no longer quiet. It spoke loudly. The Abbey of St. Thomas and many religious buildings from this era reflect the Counter-Reformation spirit, architecture as a tool of faith and persuasion. Spilberk becomes a fortress. Spilberk Castle reached its most feared phase during the Baroque era. It was converted into a massive fortress and prison. Underground casemates were carved into rock, creating dark, airless spaces. This is where architecture tells a darker story, one of suffering, isolation, and power. Baroque Brno was a city of emotions, devotion, fear, pride, and authority carved into stone. 5. Industrial Revolution, brick, smoke, and progress. The 19th century changed Brno forever. With the Industrial Revolution, Brno became known as the Manchester of Moravia. Factories and worker housing. Textile factories, mills, and warehouses reshaped the city. Brick replaced stone. Function replaced decoration. Tall chimneys rose above rooftops. Architecture now served machines, labor, and mass production. Entire neighborhoods were built for workers. Simple, repetitive housing blocks that prioritized efficiency over beauty. These buildings were not glamorous, but they were honest. They represented progress, struggle, and urban growth. Historicism and civic pride. At the same time, Brno embraced historicism, reviving older styles like Neo-Gothic and Neo-Renaissance. Public buildings such as theaters, schools, and administrative offices were built to show confidence and civic identity. Architecture became a statement. Brno was modern, educated, and ambitious. 6. Early Modernism, a radical new vision. In the early 20th century, Brno entered its most revolutionary architectural chapter. Functionalism takes over. Brno became one of Europe's leading centers of functionalist architecture, a style based on clarity, simplicity, and purpose. Functionalist buildings rejected ornament. They embraced clean lines, flat roofs, open spaces, light and air. Architecture was no longer about decoration. It was about how people live. Villa Tugendhat, a global icon. The crown jewel of Brno's architecture is Villa Tugendhat, designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. This house changed architectural history. With its open plan, steel structure, floor-to-ceiling glass walls, and seamless connection between interior and landscape, Villa Tugendhat represented a new way of thinking. It was not just a home. It was a manifesto. Today, it stands as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a symbol of Brno's courage to embrace radical ideas. 7. War, destruction, and ideology. World War II and the communist era left deep marks on Brno's architecture. War damage. Bombing destroyed parts of the city. Some historic buildings were lost forever. Others were damaged and later rebuilt in simplified forms. Socialist architecture. Under communist rule, architecture became ideological. Large housing estates, known as panlaks, were built using prefabricated concrete panels. These buildings were efficient but often monotonous. They prioritized quantity over individuality. Public buildings became massive and imposing, reflecting the power of the state. Yet even in this era, Brno architects tried to find human scale within strict limitations. 8. Post-communist revival, old meets new. After 1989, Brno entered a new architectural chapter. Historic buildings were restored. Churches regained their beauty. Streets regained their colors. At the same time, modern architecture returned, this time with freedom. Glass office buildings, cultural centers, and contemporary housing appeared. Architects began carefully blending modern materials with historic surroundings. The result is a city where medieval towers stand beside modern glass, and the contrast feels natural rather than forced. 9. Brno today, a living architectural laboratory. Today, Brno is not a museum. It is alive. Students fill modern campuses. Cafés occupy historic courtyards. Old factories become galleries and creative spaces. Architecture in Brno continues to evolve, respecting the past while experimenting with the future. This is what makes Brno special. It does not freeze its history. It lets history breathe. Conclusion: a city written in stone. The architectural history of Brno is not about one style or one era. It is about continuity. From medieval walls to modern glass, from fear to freedom, from defense to openness, Brno tells a deeply human story. Every building is a chapter. Every street is a sentence. And together, they form a city that remembers where it came from, while confidently moving forward. Brno may not demand your attention, but once it has it, it never lets go.